What time is it? It's prime time. It's prime time. What time is it? What time is it? Prime time. It's prime time. Oh yeah. Hey, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, it's Tuesday. On Tuesdays, we do a little special little show called Primetime. Not every Tuesday, only on special Tuesdays. Tonight is a special Tuesday. So, sit back, listen to the show, geek out about guitar stuff with the Primetime crew. Without further ado, here's your host, Mr. Jay Parkin. Take it away, Jay.
Welcome back, kind of, sort of. This is, I decided we're going to have a new piece of content in the Primetime family called the Primetime Experience. And what that is when we pre-record or pre-capture these discussions and then throw it up live, it's a trick. Okay, you guys get it. So Taylor Primetime, Mike, is a very corny live podcast that we do. We like to smile, have fun, joke with each other. This is why we brought Scott Paul back on the show.
I don't believe it. Understood.
Comic relief.
Understood.
Have you ever hung out with Scott?
I have hung out with Scott.
He is a great time.
He is a great time.
I love this guy. So welcome.
Cheap date, for sure.
Welcome back to the show, Scott.
Thank
you
you,
were
sir.
on like episode 4 or
Yes.
something like that.
Yes, the old school prime time.
The old school Zoom only prime time.
In the right when the pandemic hit.
Wow.
Yeah.
That episode's still going.
My
They love it.
my mother loves watching it.
Your mom, my mom's. My mom, actually, we're going to get to a segment of Hug Your Haters real quick because my mom, in this time off, we took the summer off. The summer has turned into, we're going to restart the show in October. Oh boy, we get a lot of emails. Anyway, Scott Paul, Taylor's Director of Natural Resource Sustainability. Welcome back to the show. You guys all know who this is.
Hi.
Andy Powers was the last episode. We did episode 75 with Andy Powers when we announced his job title change.
My candidacy.
Your responsibilities changed. Chief Guitar Designer, President, and CEO, and surfer, and dad, and husband, and ripping guitar player. How has it been, Andy?
I've always liked a lot of hats. I like hats.
That is a lot of hats.
Sometimes you see it in hats.
You could have been a haberdasher.
You could have been a hat maker, but you're not. How is it going?
Life is good. We're thrilled to get to keep doing the work that we love, and so it feels like this wonderful continuation of the way Taylor's always been. So I guess that's the big thrill is, well, we love what we do. We love the way we work. We love the way that we do it. We love how we get materials. We love how building the guitars. Like, this is great to get to keep doing it.
Yeah, it's pretty fun. We get to make guitars.
Yeah.
So, talk about wood sourcing.
Yeah. It's fun and games, man.
Sexy,
We're going to talk
sexy
about wood
topic.
today. It's going to be awesome. We have a very special guest with us, Mike Palat. He is the vice president over at West Coast Arborists. You may have heard of West Coast Arborists in some of our storytelling around urban ash with the GT launch.
Right.
The Builder's Edition 324 CE has urban ash on the back and sides. We have some new tonewoods we might talk about here. But Mike, how you doing?
I'm doing fantastic.
Welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
This is fantastic. Can I ask just one question before we dive into it? We have a couple of segments that are a little bit corny.
Okay.
Again, it's fun time here.
Good times.
But what the heck does an arborist do?
Professional tree nerd, basically, people who care for trees, essentially. It's an awesome profession. Lots of categories within the realm of being an arborist, but everything from being a credentialed certified arborist to just, the person who's doing the work, it could be considered an arborist. But really, the general term of that is individual who takes care of trees.
Mike, what's the difference between an arborist and a forester?
I think there's a lot of crossover there, but I would say that an arborist is mostly focused on an individual tree, more of like the tree health, the plant health care, being able to analyze it, whereas a forester is looking at a larger, grander scale, assessing forest health and making determinations on a grander scale is what I would
The
consider
way it was
difference.
described to me was an arborist looks at that tree and a forester looks at those trees.
Simplified way of
Oh,
saying
that's
it. Yep.
interesting.
Yep.
I thought a forester was a real job.
Oh, ow! Ow! Ow!
I thought a forester was
Lot of
Kick your
history
leg
here.
out on
Lot of
that
history here.
We'll change our name to West Coast Foresters. Thanks, buddy.
Wow, this is going to be. You thought this was going to be tame? No way. All right, we're going to do a couple of segments and then we'll actually get into the discussion. Again, Mike, we have a segment on the show called Hug Your Haters, and that is when we get a not so nice comment, maybe in the comment section.
Okay.
Or when my mother, who is an avid viewer of the show, doesn't get an episode in months. I get emails, I get phone calls, I get what the hex. We don't really have a lot of hate, but what we do have is we've actually seen a lot of love from this. Since in our time off, I've received probably, 2, 3, maybe 4 emails a week asking, when in the heck is the show coming back? So I'm going to give a little nod. We love you. We are coming back in October. All right. Next segment we do is called What Are You Listening To? This is pretty easy. It's a musical podcast. We are a guitar maker. Mike, what tunes have you been listening to lately?
Well, I was actually at I was just telling these guys, I went to Petco this past weekend and saw it was Def Leppard, Motley Crue, Joan Jett, and Poison. And man, what a show. What a show. It was pretty incredible, very nostalgic, and I was able to dust off my Def Leppard shirt. You know, if somebody asked me, hey, did you buy that at the concert? Nope, that was OG. So I felt a little pride about that, you know.
By the way, I wanted to go to that show. I didn't get tickets, but Joan Jett's amazing, eh?
Yeah, she was a little short because of the crowded stack of
Yeah.
musicians and that was behind, next to come. So she did her top 4 songs and was off. But they were awesome. She did fantastic, rocked it out.
So I have a question for you. I have a bunch of friends who went to the show.
Okay.
And one, this is how a really respected music nerd friend of mine said, Joan Jett was awesome. And then the other 2 played, and then Def Leppard was awesome. Is that how you feel?
I commented a little bit on some of this. I think the musicianship was pretty good. Some of the singing, a little iffy. Def Leppard rocked out musically, vocally, on every front.
Like his
so.
vocals are perfect, and he's 1,000 years old.
I was impressed, and I feel like because I'd seen Def Leppard a couple times,
Sure.
and this time the octaves seemed to be where they were appropriately supposed to be.
Wow.
Previously, I felt like they were like he was doing a different pitch of the same song, but this time definitely hit it out of the park, literally.
Okay,
It was
now I
awesome.
got to move right back into Motley Crue. How awesome was Mick Mars?
Awesome for his age, incredible.
How old is Mick Mars?
He is. I looked it up. He's 72.
What?
72. Yeah.
Ripping.
Ripping.
Right.
Ripping. They zoomed in. They didn't zoom much on his face. They zoomed in on his fingers though, and he was all over the board. Incredible.
Oh, that's
yeah,
awesome.
Definitely carried the band along with 2 other people.
Right.
Yeah.
Awesome. Oh, that's great. Let's go to you, Andy. What have you been listening to?
Oh, I listened to Jackson Brown last night. He was playing with Greg Lee's, but a great band, right? So I went and heard him. Great show. Love his songwriting. On the radio, lately I've been on a kind of a Sam Cooke
No.
kick. So
Andy, you did it again.
so it's kind of one of those rabbit holes where you go, okay, well, that's like all the awesome songs.
Yeah.
And then I somehow I ended up sorting back through some Patsy Cline records. You go, okay, seriously, it doesn't get much better than Patsy Cline.
So here's the deal, everyone. If you need to know what to listen to, just hit up Andy because he'll remind you about all these amazing musicians.
If you listen through some of these catalogs, you go, oh, I forget, that was your song? That
Yeah.
song is like an institution. Oh, that one too. Yeah.
Yeah.
Any one of these hit songs that we think of would have been like enough to propel a musician into superstardom.
Yeah.
And you look at this string of song after song, you go, you could do a volume of best hits records. And it's going to be like a 5
Yeah.
record box set, and they're only some of the hits that you made. Like, this is just amazing.
Patsy Cline.
Yeah.
But okay, this will be good. What have you been listening to, Scott?
So So I've got an Amazon Alexa in my office, and I've got this horrible habit for people that have offices near mine that I'll pick somebody and listen to them all day, every day for a month. And I just went through this huge period with Steely Dan, where I listened to nothing but Steely Dan for a month. But this month, I don't know why, but Mana, which is a band that I have an association with Mana pre-Taylor, and they're Taylor players, and that was like, oh my God, that's great.
Such a good band.
When Sueños Liquidos came out, that album, and that's really what put them on an international stage. But I've been listening to a lot of Mana, just like, 8:30 in the morning, I just say, play Mana.
Have you had a chance to hear them live?
I have, actually, and I tell you what, I'll tell you a quick...
What an experience,
I'll tell you a quick story. When I was at Greenpeace,
Right.
they're big Greenpeace supporters, and FAIR is a legitimate, environmental activist. Their Selva Negra Foundation does a lot of stuff in Mexico with sea turtles, and I ended up on tour with Mana for like 2 stops when I was at Greenpeace.
What were you playing?
I was the guy in the background who looked painfully out of place. I was never on stage. They never let me on stage. But I just remember being in Orlando, and I was sitting with Fair, and there were all these beautiful women like vying for his attention. And he was like, no. And he was legitimately wanted to talk about environmental issues with me. And we sat there for like an hour and a half. And I'm just like, hey, man, it's okay. Like if you want to go. And he was like, no. So, that's the difference between a rock star and a dork. But, that was my first experience.
Fine line.
I saw him on concert a bunch of times. And Fair has always been super nice. He seems to remember me somehow. And I've always loved their music.
Yeah.
That's fantastic.
Yeah.
I haven't gone to any shows in a while. Have I? Maybe I did. Yes, I did. I did go
Fair
to a
and
show.
Sergio were here not too long ago. Maybe it was pre-COVID. Who knows? Seems like not that long ago.
I've been listening to a couple of Taylor players, actually. Anthony Green came out with a record called Boom Done.
Okay. Solid record,
Yeah.
right?
Really amazing.
Yeah.
I'm very, very, very proud of that record as a friend of his. But and then Bartees Strange, man. Bartees Strange came out with a record called Farm to Table, and they're both just magical for me. So that's what I've been listening to. I wish I would have gone to that show. I've seen Joan Jett. I actually worked a show with a band that was opening for Joan, and it was like, oh, Joan Jett's amazing. Anyway, so there's that segment. Let's dive into this discussion. Back to you, Mike. What does an arborist do? We did this. What is the difference between an arborist and a forester?
Did that.
We did that. Do you have your answer, Scott? Are you comfortable with your answer?
Am I comfortable? Mike, let me ask you, we've known each other for a long time. When I first got assigned by Andy and Bob to look at urban wood, I was meeting with all these people, and everyone was like, oh, you got to meet Mike Palat. You got to meet Mike Palat. And finally I met Mike, and we got along right away. And a lot of what Mike is about is trying to get municipalities, he's in charge of San Diego County, but West Coast Arborist is operating in municipalities across the state into Arizona. But can you talk a little bit about what you think the current state of play is in terms of cities and trees, and do cities have the right mix? Like, what is going on out there? Why is there so much interest right now, so much money available right now to plant trees in urban areas? Like, what's the deal?
So I think a lot of it's driven by agencies stepping up their game on what's called a climate action plan. So essentially, there's a few mandates out there that are requiring cities to recognize that their individual contribution can affect on a global scale. So in California and in Arizona, to a degree, they've each come up with these, new updated policies on what they're going to do to combat climate change. And a lot of the answers are trees. A lot of the answers are planting trees to mitigate for a variety of things. And not only that, looking at the trees in evaluation of climate change, because some of the trees that are traditionally here where they are now, based on what's going to happen with the rising temperatures, might not be successful. So, implementing strategies and, the appropriate trees to adapt to the upcoming pending climate
and
changes.
beyond climate change. trees. There's a lot of explosion of literature talking about the importance of greening
Yeah.
urban infrastructure.
Yep.
Beyond climate change, like why should we care about trees?
Lots of studies on the benefits that trees provide, the psychological benefits. They've actually done studies where there's speedier medical recovery times when you are sitting in a hospital looking outside and seeing a forest or seeing trees. You're recovering faster from medical procedures. There's also grade point average correlations where you evaluate tree-lined campuses, and actually the GPAs are better where they're versus the blighted communities. Air quality is obviously another significant issue. Value of properties, the value of a home with a tree versus without a tree, especially in a
The
church.
wealthier the neighborhood, the more trees. The poorer the neighborhood, the fewer trees.
Well, and
is the disparity.
there's actually a significant effort in California specifically to change that. There's been lots of bonds and measures that have come about that specifically target disadvantaged communities. CAL FIRE, Urban and Community Forestry out of Sacramento releases a grant program every year, and those funds, a majority of them are targeted in disadvantaged communities to try and combat exactly what you're talking about. But yeah, urban forests are a big valued thing that more and more agencies are recognizing that, and we're just happy to be along for the ride to contribute to that.
It's kind of interesting to see some of those things that you'd kind of assume that people are happier when they're around a bunch of trees, right? Like you kind of just instinctively know that.
Right.
It's interesting to see some of those things start to be quantified and measured as deliberate fields of study. I mean, when we started getting into this, it's easy to name the practical reasons. You go, okay, soil erosion. Erosion control is a big deal. Noise barriers, big deal.
Right.
Shade and cooling value, big deal. Carbon sequestration, big deal. Like, those are all super practical things, but it's really interesting to see these other elements come into play and go, yeah, there's actually something to this. There's something here.
So what's most interesting for me is I've done environmental policy my whole career, worked for all these environmental groups long before I got to Taylor, and I was always a tree guy, and I've been to forests all around the world. But I don't really remember anyone ever talking about the importance of urban trees, of city trees, until relatively recently. And now it's this huge issue across the country, across the world. There's a recognition of the importance of city trees and urban trees that I really don't think, except for the arborist community, I don't think really existed in the mainstream until really, really recently.
Interesting. Andy, were you involved with Taylor and WCA, West Coast Arborists, getting together, meeting each other, starting to work with each other?
Yeah, it was actually kind of Bob and Scott and I all
At the same time.
running at this from different directions at the same time
Really?
with largely the same conclusion. I mean, I had kind of this. I've got a good friend who lives up in the Los Angeles area, and he's been a participant in the urban wood world for quite a number of years, and so he'd always been talking about it. I go, yeah, I like that. I don't know how it works, but I like the idea. And then Bob came to a similar realization on his World Forestry Tour to go, wait a minute. What if people plant trees for all sorts of reasons? What if you started planting them for end-of-life hardwood value or lumber usage value? You know, you go into a Home Depot or a Lowe's or a nursery and you go, well, here's your ornamental trees and here's your fruit trees. Here's your high-value hardwood trees. Why not? You could. And then kind of through a series of more comical events, I started realizing firsthand how difficult that was.
Right.
Like one of the funny things that turned into a head scratcher is at a school right behind our house. There was a storm, big acacia, big blackwood tree fell over. You know, they were cutting it out. Well, it started to fall, so they were taking it down. And I won't name what company that was managing that tree, and because it wasn't WCA.
It wasn't WCA.
It wasn't you guys. Don't worry. And I saw what it was. I'm like, oh my gosh, these guys were like chopping it up. I'm like, hey, can I have that? They're like, no, it's liability. You can't touch it. You can't come. You're too close. You got to step back. I'm like, I can pull. I've got a tractor parked behind my shop. because I literally got like a little front loader. Like, I can save you guys a ton of work if you just let me drive my little tractor back here and we can roll this section into the bucket. And I will take this off your hands for you. No, you can't have. And I watched them take this beautiful blackwood, chop it into little pieces, and throw it into their rear chipper. I'm like, clearly there's got to be something better that we could do with this.
So, Mike, let me pick up on that story. Why, and you're looking at this from a Southern California perspective, why do we have the trees that we have today? Like, there's a lot of mature trees around.
Great question.
Why were those trees selected and planted, and what do we need to do differently moving forward?
So a lot of what we see in the urban forest at its maturity was decisions that were made 30, 40 years ago. And a lot of them were just trends, like just a variety
aesthetics.
I like the big canopy. They see it somewhere else and they think automatically it'll be great here. So Some of that is driven by that. The nurseries, go off of what's popular and they'll bring it in because it's starting to sell. So that's a lot of what happened. And a lot of those decisions that were made 40 years ago were bad decisions. And since then, we've learned a lot. There's been a lot of studies on root invasiveness, evaluations on, tree maturity, canopy height, canopy spread, the zone in which, temperature-wise success is going to be a big factor. So all that research has really been, pressed more in the last 15 to 20 years than ever before.
So there's a problem with what species were selected. Right. There's a problem with where they put it, because
Correct.
maybe they put it between a sidewalk and a street,
right tree, right place,
right tree, right
Right.
place.
Right.
That's where we are today. We're living with the decisions that a previous generation made.
Correct.
Okay, I'm going to interrupt there.
Yeah.
But even still, the number of species that we get to do here in Southern California seems like a lot.
It's crazy.
Especially compared to other places. Because
What?
you might have a climate that can only tolerate a handful. And so when we first started talking, I think Andy Trotter sent down a list, one of the other gentlemen at WCA. He sent me this list that's like page after page after page after page after page. Right. He goes, well, which of these do you recognize any of these? Do you think you want to try? And it's like hundreds of different species. So I go,
Like one of those Italian restaurants with too many choices.
it's like, I don't know that I've worked with any more than a handful of these.
Oh, wow.
I don't even know where to start. So let's maybe start at the top of the page. You've got the biggest number of these, and they have pretty good growth characteristics.
Right.
That means that the trees are probably bigger, more useful. Let's start with those ones, I guess.
Right.
So Andy, you're lucky because you're a guitar builder based in Southern California.
Right.
Everything grows in California, so
Right.
they
And
planted everything.
Yeah, so we talk about, okay, there's mistakes that were made 30, 40, 50 years ago.
Yep.
And some of those are, from my perspective, a happy mistake
Yeah.
to make.
No,
we
there's
get to
been a
reap the
couple of
benefits of that.
huge mistakes that
But at the
benefited Taylor
same
guitar.
time, the sheer number of even what was planted, call it a generation ago, is vastly different. That makes this kind of a unique test case
Right.
for what you might see in other parts of the world.
So what's the thinking today in terms of what you want the canopy, the urban forest to look like in Southern California 20 years from now? Like, how has the thinking changed?
So really, again, based on research, they've learned, diversity is critical. The more diverse you are, the less susceptible and vulnerable you are to pests problems. Southern California specifically is a new exotic pest introduced every 40 days. That's
Really?
the stats. Every 40 days, a new pest makes its way to Southern California.
How in the heck did we
through
get that
ports,
information?
Through entry access into California, through Mexico, a variety of access points. And based on this warm climate, they tend to have success. So urban forest species diversity is a critical
Wow.
thing into the future. So no more than 10% being one dominant species. If you have more than that, you're vulnerable. So that's something that we see a lot of agencies focused on, how they're diversing their urban forests, and also taking into account climate change is another big factor. So some species you never even heard of, being introduced out here.
And thanks to a comment that Bob Taylor once made, this is a true story, there's a new criteria in terms of the consideration of what species should be planted. Do you remember that? End of life value?
End of life, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, we were in a meeting and they were talking about, climate change and species diversity and all the criteria that goes into the list of species that cities are supposed to consider. And Bob was in that meeting. We was here at Taylor, actually, and he said, is end of life value a consideration? And they looked at him and he goes, can you plant a tree that someday somebody can make something out of it? And I remember there was kind of quiet in the room, and they're like, no, that's not a criteria, but it will be. And it actually, and it is today.
It is today.
It is
yeah.
today.
Yeah,
I mean, that's real life.
Definitely
That's
end of life use, and a lot of it's driven by some of the stories involving folks at this table.
Yeah.
But it's been an exciting few years in regards to urban wood and urban wood utilization, and yeah, pretty awesome.
So I'm gonna bring it back just a little bit. How did you get involved? How did you when I was a kid, I wanted to be a garbage man because the garbage truck went around and the guy hung off the back of it. I mean, then it was like, okay, professional athlete.
Well, I'll tell you, my first introduction to
Yeah.
WCA,
Yeah.
I pulled over. I saw one of their crews.
Really?
I saw one of their crews, like literally in the half mile from the freeway to here at the shop. And I'm like, I don't know how else to do this. I'm going to pull over. And so I started talking with the guys, and I'm like, you got to talk to Mike. Got to talk to Mike. I don't know. We're working on this. This is what we're doing. But yeah, we cut down big trees sometimes. I go, okay. WCA.
Hey, on his hand. Great. That's great.
And so about the same time, you pick it up there, how you guys got introduced.
Like I said, everybody that I met in San Diego and explained what my mission was, I'm like,
What is your mission?
well, the mission that what it came down to for Taylor Guitars is I searched, I literally went to the first UN International Conference on Urban Trees. I talked to people in Washington, D.C. I went all over the place. But it turned out that our local arborist, West Coast Arborist,
Yeah.
is the only operation, I believe, in the world that can give us the three things we need. And we need quality, we need quantity, and we need predictability. Because Andy's not into building a one-off eco guitar. You know, if we do this, we want to have a dedicated model and have some assurance that we're going to be able to make this guitar next year and in 5 years and 10 years. And WCA could give us this. We're in Southern California, so there's tremendous volume for Andy to look through and find some winners. WCA can give us the volume because they're across the state, they're into the next neighboring state, and their software programs, their tree tracking database, which is just mind-blowingly sophisticated, can also just give a good guess that, you know, I think it's safe to say that for the next 10 or 15 years, chamois ash is going to be coming through the system. Now, it's up for the city to decide when a tree lives or dies, and it needs to be planted or needs to come down. The West Coast Arborist just does the maintenance and does the bidding of the city, but their database gave Andy the insurance to know that if you did everything you need to do to build a new guitar out of a new wood, that we're going to have that wood available for the next year or 10.
Yeah, it was like when we finally got introduced, it was like somebody turned the lights on.
Oh, right.
So you walk in, they started showing us their operation. Was like, okay, now here's somebody who had enough forward-thinking momentum to take initiative, build a log sort yard, so you're not just mulching stuff on the spot to get rid of the material. You've got a way to track the maintenance and the future outlook of every single tree. Consider that for a minute. I mean, how many trees is that under your management?
It's
Individuals.
millions of trees.
So it's
Yeah.
millions of individual trees
He's got an
that
app
they
for
have an outlook on.
Who's got an
And
app
that's
for
why
that?
they could say, we expect within the next 2 years that this number of trees of this species will come out that fall, not just that, but fall into these certain criteria of, you know, this one was by a roadway, so it was trimmed to a certain height before it was allowed to branch out for roadway clearance. Like all these kinds of things where you go, this is like a dream come true.
Right.
they were so far ahead in just thinking, well, there's got to be some sort of value in these trees.
Yeah, we were in the space pretty early as
So-
far as urban wood.
You obviously didn't want to become a garbage man, but you became an arborist.
Yes.
And
They also get cool trucks.
they do, arborists do have cool
Yeah, they
trucks.
got really cool
They have
trucks.
better.
They got
have
Except I
better-
drive a Prius.
we have
but-
golf carts though, but they have.
They've got cherry pickers, they've got chippers, they got all kinds of.
We've
cool
got a really amazing orange minivan that's also pretty cool.
Hey.
though. Yours aren't orange. This is burnt
Yellow.
orange.
His get
so it's
safety
yellow.
stripes.
Yeah.
Yours are yellow.
Yes,
Okay,
yellow.
Yellow.
Yes.
Okay. But so you just woke up one day and said, "I'm going to go hang out with trees."
I'm originally from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Diehard Steelers.
Let's
fan.
not talk about Steelers.
Sorry.
Dem Stillers, right?
Stillers.
You say that? Stillers.
Oh, yeah.
Dem Stillers.
Lurs,
Sam Stiller?
Lurs for short.
Yeah.
But yeah, I grew up in Pennsylvania, grew up in the woods, and just had a passion for general forests. I was trying to find a career path that would get me to that, and graduated and got a college degree in a related field. And my first job out of college was actually collecting tree inventories for cities out of a company in Ohio. Shipped me all over the world, sent me here to Southern California in the dead of winter, which was their mistake because I never went back. So
We live where people vacation.
yes, so that was basically a short story of how I became an arborist. And I've been with West Coast Arborists for coming up to 20 years. Greatest company I've ever worked for, family-owned business, and just innovative, like you guys have been talking about. It's cutting edge.
In a
and
lot
I
of
love
weird
the
ways,
ride.
a mirror image to Taylor Guitars.
A lot.
When
A lot of
they
weird
were
ways.
founded,
Parallels
Yeah,
were
Yeah.
50
really
this is our
remarkable.
50th year right
Right.
now, so I don't know where you guys are. You guys are pretty
We're
close to that. I
coming up
believe.
on that.
Yeah,
Coming
so
up on
it's-
50.
Yeah.
Pretty-
we are
pretty
coming
awesome.
up on 50.
Yeah,
That's
I
great.
remember when Pat Mahoney, who's the owner of West Coast Arborists, and Bob met for the first time, just their brief 20, 30-minute conversation, just listening to them dialogue. It was so much in common.
Yeah.
Business size, employees, years in business, just the similar rides.
Right.
Different industry, obviously, but just similar rides.
When
and
did
just
they
to be
meet? They
connected.
met recently. In the
It was
past-
some years
Right,
ago now.
the beginning of
Yeah.
the relationship with Taylor
Right.
Guitars.
So
I
that
mean,
many years
you have
of
to
it kinda
understand
meet in
this
the
goes
middle.
back quite a few years because it was several years of development before we ever launched a guitar.
Sure.
And so our first, call it urban wood guitar, a guitar that used urban wood for some of its components. That was at the very beginning, like the first week or 2 weeks of 2020. So it's been a couple of years in the rear view mirror already, but that had been preceded with, I don't know, 3, 4, 5 years of development from the time we first met and then started walking through the Ontario log yard with chainsaws, taste testing.
Yeah.
We're like, just cut a chunk off that one. Let's try this. Let's try some of that. Put them in the truck. We'll head home and
Well,
start cooking.
I remember the day because to me, one of the big takeaways was how you specifically looked at a log. We looked at logs.
Yeah.
We see slabs. We see,
Yeah.
board feet. But you were like very specifically honed in on like a little part of a log, which
seriously,
my-
Mike,
I look for guitar parts inside the
yeah,
log.
no, and I felt that. I remember standing over your shoulder. I'm like, what's he looking at?
I
Oh,
just
wow.
remember being with you because, well, you and I had been talking and scheming and planning and for a long time, but at high noon, and probably my most pivotal day since I've been at Taylor Guitars was when Andy and Bob and Cosgrove and a bunch of folks went up there because I knew everything would work if Andy could find guitar wood in there. That's the only thing I didn't know. And the sense of relief I had when Bob and Andy took off like two kids in Toys R Us towards all these piles of wood, and they were just, it was like a shamanistic dance or something. They're touching the wood and feeling the wood, and you could tell that they saw good wood in
remember
there
that day.
on a level that, I mean, I know a little bit about trees, you know a little bit
Yeah.
about trees, but we're just like, wow, they're both really interested in the Shamalash, and they're really interested in that pile. They don't seem that interested in that pile. It was a really, really fascinating day.
Yep.
You know, it's great. I think producer Rolly over there has footage of this too, so we'll probably cut that in to watch Bob and Andy do their
Shamanistic dance.
Okay, so I have a quiz question for you then. When people talk about urban forest, for those who really are trying to follow this conversation, Scott, what does that mean? What do we mean
What
by
is an
that?
urban forest? Okay, so an urban forest is every individual tree you see in your life in the post office, in your backyard, if you live in an urban area. Now just imagine in your mind's eye, you zoom up like Google Earth, zoom up, zoom up, zoom up. Suddenly those individual trees start forming a canopy. Suddenly you start seeing the mosaic of trees across an urban landscape. That's a functioning ecosystem. There are all sorts of birds and squirrels and animals and fungus that are going across that infrastructure, and it's operating as a cohesive unit, to do all the things that Mike mentioned earlier, from producing oxygen and absorbing carbon and blocking noise pollution and water runoff. So the urban forest is just all the individual trees that you think are individual trees zoom up and they become a canopy, and that's really what we're talking about.
And they work together.
And they work together.
So why isn't urban wood sourcing or urban wood use a bigger thing? This might be a question for the whole table. You get it, Andy.
Because it's hard.
Okay.
It's hard.
Explain.
Okay, I'll say it this way: we've all heard the expression, or the kind of the philosophical comment that says, if a tree falls in the forest and nobody's around to hear it, did it make a sound? If a tree falls in the middle of a city, everybody hears it. Is that a pretty fair assessment of
Not
the
if you do
scenario?
your job right.
Wow. There's targets in urban forests. Maintain your
It's
trees
hard.
properly and inspect them.
It's
for
really
risk.
hard. It's hard to take a tree down.
Yeah.
Okay, it's hard to remove it. It's hard to manage it. I mean, think of trying to just maintain it. How many cones you got to put out? How many cars have to drive around a guy in a cherry picker with a chainsaw just to do pruning? Right? It's hard.
Doing research for this episode, I started looking up and searching and diving into things, and I found this like Instagram feed channel, really, and it's an arborist. It's this one guy, and it's just him. He has like a GoPro on him when he's like hundreds of feet in the air and chopping, and how well everything is rigged so that the tree when it falls or that section
Yeah, you got to
doesn't
control
crush.
urban environments. You got to
Right.
control.
And I'm just like, okay, you're right. It's hard.
It's hard.
Yeah, definitely. And you got to have the right equipment too.
But it is
Seriously.
for us, and Andy can speak to this probably better than I can, or definitely better than I can. It's still easier and cheaper for Taylor to get mahogany from Fiji or rosewood from India than it is to get chamois ash or red ironbark from Riverside County, just up the road from us.
Is that because there's already systems in place?
Yeah, I'll explain, and then Andy will do a much more accurate description. But the infrastructure, the efficiencies built into getting wood across the plant, it's pretty sophisticated stuff. They got it dialed in. And what we're doing with urban wood has really never been done before. You've got Taylor guitars and you've got room and board. And we're the only two nationally branded
As in the
companies.
furniture company.
Like Crate and
Retail.
Barrel, but it's room and board. And we're the only two companies, nationally branded companies, I believe, in the world. You can walk into a store in Boston or Toronto or Austin, and you can buy urban wood furniture from Room and Board, and you can buy an urban wood guitar from Taylor. We're the only two companies that have been able to get that done because the infrastructure was designed to dispose of this wood, not to capture this wood.
Right. And I think the commercial lumber industry already has these paths to market that are so well established. So if you're comparing the two, we're in the dinosaur age compared to where that industry
It
is.
really is. I mean, there's a lot of parallels like modern agriculture. Okay, so if you go to a giant industrial farming operation, they're oriented towards this sense of scale and efficiency that makes it extremely efficient. If you were to try and grow wheat in your backyard, it is
It's painful.
tremendously difficult.
Right.
Right.
And your yield out of it is going to be very small. It's going to be very expensive to do. It doesn't actually make much sense. Doesn't mean you shouldn't do it because there's value in it, but you're not going to be economically competitive.
Right.
Like a lot of people don't even realize this, but a log doesn't actually have much value world round. Like it sounds tragic to me because I love trees, but a log that's not what wood costs. It isn't the log. It's really the cost of the person running their saw blade through it. That's what makes wood expensive. It's
Interesting.
Whose saw blade did you run through it? What sort of economic scale were they being paid at when they ran their saw blade through it?
I've heard you say that before.
Right.
If you find somebody who can cut the wood right, I can paraphrasing
Yeah.
here, but
But
if
that's
you find
the
somebody who can
thing.
cut guitar wood, it's good guitar wood or
Yeah,
something
yeah,
like
that's
that.
the thing. It's like you get a log, and okay, well, you go to India and you're going to use East Indian rosewood as firewood because it's just local wood, right? It's firewood in India. You go to Africa and you need firewood, you're going to burn ebony or something else that's growing there. You know, no different than us burning some eucalyptus because that's what's commonly available. You know, you burn a gum eucalyptus. Okay, well, this stuff's plentiful and not, that's what gum eucalyptuses are often used for. So it's not so much the value of the log, it's the cost of the person running their saw blade through it to turn it into something.
Well, and if I could, the reality of we're not managing stands of trees. We're not in the scale of removals that, obviously the cities make that decision, but we're not out removing stands that are predestined for this. So
Right.
it's a, agency issues
It's a
us these
customized
5
thing.
removals that are scattered all over town. We go execute those removals and
Carefully with all the gear.
yeah. So it's definitely a different operation
Right.
than the traditional infrastructure of modern lumber, for sure.
So we've talked about this sorting yard or this big lumber yard that you guys. So what made you start that process? So you just saw these trees and said maybe there's value. We should put them here.
There was I mentioned CAL FIRE a little bit ago. CAL FIRE Urban Community Forestry had a grant program. There was some early folks involved at CAL FIRE that recognized that there is some value in urban wood. So we were involved in a grant that basically was almost the kickoff of what is now Street Tree Revival, which is
Right.
basically part of West Coast Arborists. But it started with a little bit of seed money. We bought a mill. Invested in some dry kilns, graduated to vacuum kilns, and then realized quickly a sort yard was a critical missing piece that we in Ontario we acquired a large plot of land that made sense, and since that we've developed it quite a bit.
How often do you get there? Do you get to
can-
visit there often?
I do. It's kind of a treat because it's a log yard that you get to go see and you don't have to get on an airplane, which is kind of amazing. It's
Tell us
actually
about
throughout,
that one trip to Tasmania.
you know,
You'd be home for dinner.
that was a long flight. But throughout these last couple of years where a lot of things were interrupted and you couldn't travel places, it was kind of a lifesaver to go, well, we could take the flatbed truck up and go get some wood and bring it back and make some guitars, and we're all gonna be okay if we do that. Great, let's work that plan. That's a good thing. Let's go with that.
Wow. Sorry, Scott. You were going to say something.
No, I was just going to say with CAL FIRE, you just really can't overstate the importance of CAL FIRE in providing the resources for a lot of this urban infrastructure for planting new trees.
Yeah, they're big
and-
supporters. They get it, and they're
just wanted to give
those
a
initiatives of reallocating government funds towards the greater good like
big,
that.
Big
It's pretty
shout
awesome.
out to CAL FIRE. Andy, I got a question for you. I was really struck one day when I heard Bob Taylor say that during the course of his career, he feels like he's walked through the threshold from in regard to purchasing wood to build guitars.
Right.
He feels like he's walked through the threshold from how it's always been, 200 years, to how it has to be. And for a guy whose most of his career is on the other side of that threshold, and you're looking out 5, 10, 40, 50 years for this company, and you're seeing major changes to what was never, no one had to think about where wood came because the wood fairies brought it to us. Now it's changing right before our eyes. I'd really like to hear your perspective on that change, urban wood, how urban wood fits in, but even beyond urban wood, just what you're confronting as a builder with so much change in front of you.
I've said it this way before, is that for a long time, it's not forever, because modern logistics have not been in place forever. But for a few centuries, long time, you could basically go to a part of the world, find something that you liked, take it, and bring it home. Well, woodworkers, instrument builders, and specifically, we operated like hunter-gatherers, right?
Okay.
You go out, you find what you need, you take it, you're good.
Right.
Got what you need. Well, the day came when that wasn't sufficient, and you turn into farmers. You deliberately start propagating for what you need tomorrow, right? And that's the threshold that Bob's talking about, is going, well, this is the way that this has been for before my generation, for the generation before that, up until now, and now I'm seeing, oh, this is the transition point. This is where it changes into something different than the way it's been. And ironically, it's like a shift back into what would have happened centuries ago when you didn't have the ability to fly halfway around the world or sail halfway around the world to get this little premium slice of something. It's kind of like, well, I can't, logs are big and heavy. I can't bring that thing back. I can't carry it. I don't have a horse that big or a donkey that can pull that. There's a big tree in the yard. I'll use that one.
Wire, violins, maple, and spruce.
That's what grew, right?
That's what grew on the mountainside.
It's like I need a softwood for the top and I need a hardwood for the back and sides.
Look, there's some.
Great. That one and that one. I can get those. They're not that far. They work, and I'll design. The form will start to develop around the characteristics of what is available.
Right.
You go, why do we use this? Because it was available, and we developed the instrument around the characteristics of that material, right? It's like cooking. It's like so many other things that we do. Go, well, these ingredients grow here, so we're going to develop a style of cooking that's regional based on what grows here, right?
Yeah.
It's a lot like that.
It's interesting. So when we first started using urban ash, so shamel ash, correct?
Yep.
Yeah, Archie
and-
Shamel.
Right.
Archie.
And so when you were at the sort yard and you find this, and I can only imagine there's some tapping and some inspecting. I can see it. I can see Andy getting
was.
into it because Andy, you're
Gets
real.
personal.
Let's just be real. The audience agrees with me. I'm gonna look right at the camera. Andy, you're a different guitar builder. You're thoughtful. You're deliberate. You're.
I appreciate that.
You're finding
Some
you're-
people say obsessive compulsive.
Yes, I would say you're a,
We're wise out of this.
That's very polite of you. I appreciate
You're a
it.
huge guitar nerd. Yes. You're a huge tree nerd. Scott's a huge nerd.
He's a policy guy.
I know, but
an
he's,
environmentalist steward.
I mean, but he's fantastic, man.
Yeah.
I smile every time I see. But anyway, so yes, you could say obsessive. Who cares? I say you're deliberate. You're thoughtful. You have intention when you are designing something to build. We first started using urban ash, as we call it, or shamel ash. Why the decision for that wood to start with? And then let's move on to, you worked with Mike and his team to choose this wood that's in front of us, and we'll talk about that in a minute.
The Shamel Ash, honestly, the choice is because it was easy. It is. It's a lot of guitar making is practical.
Okay.
So let's go down the list. What makes a usable wood?
There you go.
Okay. Can you get it? Job number one. Can you saw it? Job number two. Can you dry it?
Ooh,
That's a big deal.
that's a big deal.
That's a really big deal. Because if you can't dry it, you don't even try.
Try to
Don't
use
even bother, because even if you were to build an instrument out of it, it's not going to be reliable. It's not going to hold together. It's not going to be stable. It's going to cause all kinds of fits for a musician. There's no value in that.
Sure.
There's no hope for that. So you got to get it. You got to be able to saw it. You got to be able to dry it.
Can I chime in on that a little
Yeah.
bit? So not only that, but the timing of it being a pretty prevalent removal.
Right.
I mentioned 40 years ago the trends. Well, a lot of shamel ashes
Right.
were planted in narrow parkway strips.
Oh,
'Cause
really?
They were fast growing, and 40 years ago they were very trendy and popular. Now, fast forward 40 years later, curb is damaged, sidewalks destroyed, to a point where if you root prune it, the tree's going to fall over. So there's quite a bit of what we're seeing now of these removal trends because of that 40-year decision
Yeah.
ago, which was fortuitous.
So that's a happy
was,
accident.
Yeah,
That was
it's the
kind of
happy
like I
accident.
started looking
Yeah.
on this list and go, boy, you guys, what's this one? You guys sure are taking out a lot of these.
Yeah.
What's that all
Yes.
about?
Okay, so I look at that one and go, whoa, there's a bunch of
Pizza.
them. I can saw
I
it.
love pizza.
I can dry. Oh, this stuff I can dry.
Oh, wow.
Oh, okay. And then you start looking at other little things. You go, well, I can glue it. I can finish it. I can sand it. Nobody's allergic to it. Like really practical things. And then you start looking at physical characteristics beyond that. Go, what's the density like? What's the grain structure like? What's its moisture loss and absorption rate after drying and seasoning like? What's, you go through this list of things that are all have super nerdy engineering kind of terms. But finally come down to, what's this stuff going to sound like?
Yeah,
Okay,
right.
what does it sound like? And you can't answer that until you find out, well, how are you going to use it? Is this a neck wood? Is this a fretboard wood? Is this a top wood? Is this a back and side wood? What's that like? And so I started looking at the chamois lash going, man, in a lot of physical respects, it's very much like Honduran mahogany. It's similar density. It has similar grain structure in a lot of ways. It behaves similar drying, shrinkage, all these things. So, well, that's the easy one. It's like the golden retriever.
Yeah.
Just wants to make you happy, right? She's like, here I am. I'm like the perfect working wood. It works great. And it sounds really good. Super. Let's start with the one that we can manage, right?
There you go, because it was good.
Yeah, it was good. Okay, well, as part of that initial taste testing expedition, I came away with some of this, what we call red ironbark. And that one, honestly, that's taken me a little longer to figure out, because that's a wood that was a head scratcher in sort of every way. And I say that because it has a bunch of characteristics that I would not typically associate. I wouldn't put them together. One is that it's hard. It is hard like a piece of metal. It is hard.
Really?
It is so hard.
Is it hard to cut?
It
It's
definitely dulls chainsaws.
hard.
Really?
Absolutely.
You're
yeah.
going to sharpen that chain a lot of times. It's
Interesting.
really hard. Okay, well, great. In the instrument building world, we use a lot of hardwoods. We use things like ebony. We use rosewoods. We do stuff like that. Okay, well, there's places for really hard woods. That's good to know. Those hardwoods tend to be, aside from hard to get and hard to dry without cracking, they tend to fall apart, right? They tend to really
Crumble.
crack.
Yeah.
Like you get a piece of ebony, it's really difficult to dry that stuff. Okay, well, this one doesn't really do that. So it's weird. For something that has a density that's so heavy it'll sink in water. I mean, that's kind of an interesting science experiment. It's like one of the only, there's a handful of woods in the world that will sink in water.
Right.
Ebony's one of them, only when it's wet. It kind of flirts with that threshold. Red ironbark is one of them. The stuff is hard and dense, except that it had these great working characteristics. And so those don't usually go together. That was a total head scratcher. Normally I wouldn't be able to dry something like this in a piece like this. I normally wouldn't be able to bend it well for a set of sides. Normally it wouldn't glue well because it'll tend to be super oily. But this wood does these things. And so at first it was like, what is this, a fluke? Is this like one freakish, weird anomaly of a piece? So we had to study that, get some more versions, find out what it does in a larger quantity, and that kind of thing. But come to find out, man, this is a really interesting material. There's not a lot of other things that I know of that are like this one.
And you're not like a used car salesman. Like you're not going out there and going, Andy, I got this wood for you.
Nope.
No, this one we cut a chunk off, and it was like, oh, watch your toes. That thing is
heavy.
Heavy piece of wood.
It's heavy wood. Absolutely.
That's gonna.
What does it remind you of?
In terms of weight.
Just in terms of
In
picking
terms
it up
of
and playing
weight,
it.
Cast iron. No, it's kind of like, okay, similar comparisons. If you're going to say something like, well, it tastes like chicken, it's like kind of like an ebony rosewood blend in terms of density and reflection, but some of the mid-range presence of mahogany.
Sure.
If that makes sense. Like I can't usually put those together because they
Right.
don't behave alike. But this one has this real strong, like authoritative voice when I use it as a back and side wood. And it's got this reflective quality that you hear from a super dense wood. It's really interesting.
By the time this episode comes out, that everybody is going to know about these guitars that we're talking about. You'll be able to hear red Ironbark, right? Urban Ironbark. It's phenomenal. I've already been lucky enough to hear it recorded over and over and over again, and every time. I'm sending you a video later, Andy.
Yeah.
Daniel's playing it. He plays a 514 fingerstyle, and it's like...
It's got that amplifying quality.
But it's like, for the audio nerds in the room, back in the corner, you can't see it. It's like you pick up the best high-end compressor, and it's just there.
Right.
It's not in the signal chain. It's a part of the whole thing. It's just gorgeous. It's
better
beautiful.
by the time it comes out the other end.
I'd sound beautiful. Anyway, I could sit here and gush about how these guitars sound for a while, but there are a couple of questions that we have from guitar players out there. Is urban wood waste wood?
I would say no. I mean, there's a ton of variety of uses, even if it's not being turned into an amazing guitar. There's so much use considerations that are starting to grow from people's imaginations, really, including what this guy just went through. So, no, I wouldn't call it waste. There's a lot of, even if it's not straight, there's character things you can do with urban wood. And then mulch is a huge benefit, even if it'll help service other trees as part of that decomposition. So, no, I would say there's no waste of urban wood.
And then here's one that you're going to get. We get it all the time, and that's, you touched on it a little bit, but maybe if we could fine tune it, and that is Taylor's decided to use urban wood because it's cheaper. So the guitars,
I sure wish it was.
So the guitars should be cheaper.
Not easier.
And so, how would you answer that? Is it cheaper?
Unfortunately, it's not. I would love for it to be. No.
All right, get the octagon out.
No. Like I said earlier, is a lot of the cost for a maker. The cost of a piece of wood lies in the person who's driving their saw blade through it, right? And so, while the log may have a different value assigned to it when it falls, that doesn't actually affect very much. It's the other stuff that gets added. It's the difficulty of removal. What's the logistics like? What's the cost?
The equipment necessary
equipment
in an urban
necessary
environment
to
to
handle
preserve.
it.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, in a giant forest that was commercially harvested for logging purposes, you have roads deliberately built to handle logging equipment. You want to try and move a log on a city street and keep the thing large and intact so you can get it to a place where you could then break it down. That is not easy and not inexpensive. Okay, so there's a lot of barriers like that. It's not a cheaper choice, if that's what the question is. And it's logical. I understand it. You go, well, it's close by, therefore it shouldn't cost as much. Well, yeah, it's close by, but that means that you're paying a person such and such to use such and such a piece of gear with these set of regulations and these set of restrictions in order to do it. Doesn't mean it shouldn't be done, but it's not cheap.
Yeah.
But I want to stress the point. Just because it's hard and expensive, that should not be the only reason to not do something. I don't want to do just the cheap, easy things.
Right.
These are worthwhile endeavors because there's value in it. Right. There is value in it. It might not always make sense in dollars and cents, but there is value in it.
Yeah. The guitars are amazing.
And the guitars are really cool.
And I really can't wait.
Yeah.
I
They're really cool
The
guitar.
Urban Ash guitars, I think the Builder's Edition 324 and the GT.
My favorite.
But I think the Builder's Edition 324 just might be, that's one of the best guitars in our line.
Yeah.
Quality, You get the builder's edition attributes
And the versatility of the sound of that guitar.
and the versatility.
kind of
It's-
goes almost anywhere.
It records well. It plays live
These
well.
instruments, these new 500 series guitars, are up there as kind of like this really eye-opening next step. I mean, in a lot of ways, for me, it's interesting because it's the first time that we've taken a traditional wood from a series of guitar that's a long-term, like, legacy model and replaced it with something out of a totally new forestry model.
Yeah.
I mean, we're building lots of mahogany guitars. We're using mahogany 300 series guitars.
Right.
I mean, I love mahogany. It's great, especially the mahogany that we're getting out of Fiji. It's like, okay, well, there's another wonderful forestry model. It's great. There's nothing wrong with that. I love it. But this is really interesting to reconceive what a legacy model would be like with a new type of voicing and coming from a different sort of philosophy to begin with. It's like it's an instrument for a new day.
It's magical. I had an artist the other day say it's Goldilocks, which is odd because or ironic because we call sometimes when we have new instruments in their secret phase, we'll call it the Goldilocks guitar or
It's the just right.
whatever, the just right or it's this thing. And it's really funny when you hear Andy. It's funny to ask Andy who a guitar is made for because he says it's made for everybody. It's got songs in it, and that is. And then it's also a cheat code when Andy plays because he knows exactly how to make that wood sound just, beautiful and it blooms.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
There's a little bit of that. Scott, as we wrap up this episode, I have a couple of questions, a question for Mike and a question for Scott. Scott, what is your goal out of the relationship with WCA and our Urban Wood initiative moving forward?
So as I said a little while ago, my entire adult career I've been involved with environmental policy, environmental advocacy, and I feel like I've been prophesizing along with my generation of forest activists that we have a math problem. That there's the supply and demand is going to get out of skew, but it was always hypothetical. And it's interesting to me that since I've been at Taylor, we're seeing the real world turbulence of overtaxing resources that we have traditionally used with little thought. And it doesn't have to be scary. We just have to think. We have to adapt. And that's why I just find myself so fortunate to have landed at Taylor Guitars where, Bob created a company based on innovation, and we've actually got a real live builder at the helm who's constantly innovating. And it puts us in a really enviable position to be able to adapt. I heard Andy once say, you don't know what you can build until you know what you can build it from. So
I love that.
I know that the resources that this industry has traditionally used with little forethought are changing. And it's not a coincidence that at the same point in history, Taylor Guitars introduced variegated fingerboards. Taylor Guitars introduced urban woods. Taylor Guitars is using more plantation woods, more domestic species, changes in design and build. This is all happening at the same time and for the same reason. The same point in history, we're reacting to the changing resources available to us. And urban wood, being able to tap an urban wood resource, it's super responsible. I mean, I sleep great. I mean, I'm really proud of what we've accomplished.
I agree with you.
I think there's so many good win-win things coming that could come from this. And it's just another tool. It's another arrow that we can put in Andy's, what is it, quiver? Or what is arrow and quiver and arrow,
Can
whatever
I
it
add
is.
something to that, though? There's one little thing that you said that I want to respond to. We don't react. We don't react. What happens? A reaction
I do.
to
He doesn't.
No, a reaction is what happens when you get caught unaware. Right?
Oh, yeah.
All right.
Right? We're aware of what's going on, in a large part thanks to the work that you do.
Yeah,
You're
we're
watching
looking around the corner.
2, 3, 5, 10 years, 20 years down the road, In the same way that WCA is looking 2, 3, 5, 10, 20 years down the road and going, what's happening here?
Yeah.
Okay? I don't want to ever be in a position where we have to react because it's going to be bad, right? It's never as good when you're like stuck. What I want to do is be aware of what's going on and be able to respond to that.
Yep.
And so that you can make those decisions now to position yourself so that you're not stuck. We want to build these guitars and put them in the hands of musicians, and I don't want a musician to have to apologize or a builder like us to have to apologize to go, well, yeah, we couldn't get this anymore, so because that, we got stuck, so now here's a substitute. Well, that's no fun. That's no good. What I want to do is be aware of what's going on in the world and respond by creating instruments on purpose where you go, this is a first-rate tone wood that I just never would have known had it not been for us looking farther ahead and saying, I see how things are changing.
So
Let's do something about it.
So if any of you were questioning out there if he's the right man for the job, he just said it. All right. I mean, there's in the military,
I understand what you were saying, but to me, there's a philosophical
I accept
position
that friendly amendment
that you want to take to go. We do these things on purpose.
Yeah.
No, it's true, and I'm glad I got to change my thinking a little bit because we're in the wood strategy meetings and we're seeing some things that are on the horizon in terms of new legislation or new policy, and sometimes we kind of smile at each other and go, are we smart or are we kind of lucky because we're positioning ourselves, and it's paying off as we're kind of seeing things unfold, changes coming down the pipe in terms of the forest products trade. Mm-hmm. And I think Andy's right that we are making changes now because we understand to some degree what's coming.
Right.
Yeah, that's fantastic, and you guys have been on the front of that. For a
Yeah,
while,
it's been an awesome ride.
which is pretty amazing. So I'll go back to that goals question that I had for Scott. What is your goal as WCA, as representing WCA in your position? What is your goal with this relationship with Taylor Guitar?
I mean, as a company that gets to service about 300 public agencies between California and Arizona, we're just grateful to be a resource to maintain trees. We get this privilege of revisiting the same trees year after year, and obviously we like that to be sustainable. And when trees do need to come out, we're fortunate enough to be in the pipeline to be able to do the right thing. So I think what I'd like to see is a future that obviously continues that, preserves trees for the right reasons, and then when trees do have to come down, recycling them. And then this diversity conversation I brought up earlier, having agencies recognize that you do need to diversify your urban forests, giving you more wood to play with, to experiment with over the next few years is definitely a goal of ours. And then additionally, we're working closely with agencies. You mentioned policy. There's a little bit of an initiative on this recognition of urban wood recycling. So within a few currently climate action plans, there's an earmarked urban wood policy that we've gotten adopted in a few cities, including Carlsbad.
Right.
But there's basically, as cities have to make a decision when a tree has to come down. It's policy that says we're going to do something with this wood, regardless of who takes it down. Recognizing that is a resource.
It's a resource.
It's an opportunity to sequester carbon, which is typically a climate action plan goal. And there's a prime opportunity that otherwise, without some of these policies, sometimes the story of what you talked about, everybody chipping it up, the perfect good piece of wood gets chipped up and lost. So some of these things have to be driven by policy, and we're fortunate to be a little bit of an influencer with public agencies on that. So I'd love to see a lot more cities adopt urban wood policies that end up, making this a higher, more recognized, valued thing.
They say red states, blue states love music. I think we could agree that planting trees would land in that ballpark.
Right.
Absolutely.
I think so. Speaking of ballpark, what is your World Series championship as an arborist? What is your Stanley Cup? What is that moment where you're like, is it a KPI? This is how many trees we planted this year, or what is it?
I would love to see more trees planted than are removed, but unfortunately, we're faced with the reality that actually a lot more trees come down than what are planted. So that would be an awesome goal, is to see the reverse of that. The average lifespan of an urban tree is 8 years right now.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. A lot of reasons contribute to that, including we love the event where we got to plant the tree, but we forgot to water it. Very common problem that we see. Urban environments are really tough. Person opens up the car door, smashes into it. The guy weed whacking the grass, clips the bottom of the tree, damaging the tree. Structural problems with trees that aren't addressed when the tree is young. There's so many factors that go into that 8 years. So I'd love to see that extended. That would be a nice home run, is to have the average lifespan of an urban tree be a lot longer than that.
The average career span of an MLB player is 3 years. So you've beat that.
We beat that.
You've beat the odds. You've beat the odds. Thank you,
Always
thank you
comes back
guys.
to baseball.
Always back to baseball, except for I'm not even wearing a baseball hat. Premier League. You know what I mean? Premier. What do they say? How do they pronounce it? Premier League. Premier League. Anyway, Tottenham. It's all good. I'm excited about this. Mike, it's been a pleasure having you here.
Thank
this
you for
is
having
really
me.
interesting. And Andy, thanks again for your
My pleasure.
innovation and your inspiration and building these instruments that keep us coming back to work every day.
I'm lucky to get to do it.
I know. It's a good time, isn't it?
Yeah,
I
it
mean,
really is.
This is fun. Really, it's fun.
Great
Thank you.
partnership.
Thank you, Scott. Oh, man. I'm going to have you on as a guest host more often.
You should.
I think he is just fantastic. This was a tryout. No, I didn't even tell you, but
All right.
this is a tryout.
I was only in second gear, brother. If you want to,
Oh, yeah.
if you want to, I'll bring it. I'll bring it.
I've
coffee
seen
cup.
Scott in third and fourth gear.
I mean, oh boy. Well, I'll talk to you after the show. Anyway, ladies, gentlemen, viewers, everybody out there checking Primetime Experience out with us. Thanks to our guest, Mike Palat, Scott, Paul, as always, and Andy. Top. I call him Top. I was in the military, so I get to call him Top now. So anyway, thank you for another great episode of Taylor Primetime Experience. Have a good one.
What was it? What was it? It was prime time. That was prime time. What the heck was it? Well, that was prime time. Well, we hope you liked the show tonight. But there was a special Tuesday. And on special Tuesdays, we do prime time. And we're looking forward to the next time we can do a show together. So, until then, keep playing, keep rocking, keep smiling, and wait for another